The blizzard came without warning on a February morning in 1881, turning the high mountain pass above El Paso, Texas, into a death trap that swallowed Josephine Fletcher whole before anyone realized she had vanished. Samuel Jennings had been tracking cattle thieves through the Franklin Mountains when the storm hit, forcing him to take shelter in a rocky outcrop barely wide enough for him and his horse. He watched the world turn white, the wind howling like a wounded animal as snow piled up faster than he had ever seen in his 24 years. Texas snowstorms were rare but vicious when they came, especially this far north in the mountains. By the time the storm passed 3 days later, the landscape had transformed into something unrecognizable. Every trail buried, every landmark hidden beneath drifts that reached higher than a man on horseback. Samuel made his way back to El Paso slowly, his buckskin gelding struggling through the deep snow. The town was in chaos when he arrived. Half the buildings had collapsed under the weight of the unexpected snow, and people were digging out their neighbors, searching for supplies, trying to account for everyone. That was when he heard about Josephine Fletcher. She had been traveling from her family's ranch to town when the storm struck. Her father, Thomas Fletcher, stood in the middle of the street, his face gray with worry, organizing search parties. Samuel dismounted and approached him immediately. "I will find her," Samuel said without preamble. He did not know the Fletchers well, though he had seen Josephine around town a handful of times. She was 19, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight and green eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had smiled at him once outside the general store, and he had been too tongue-tied to do more than nod back. Thomas Fletcher looked at him with desperate hope. "The storm came so fast. She was taking the mountain trail. We have been searching, but the snow, it has covered everything." Samuel nodded. "I know those mountains better than most. I will bring her home." He did not wait for a response. He restocked his supplies, filled his saddlebags with extra food and blankets, and set out again before the sun reached its peak. Other search parties had given up after 2 days, convinced that no one could survive that long in such conditions. But Samuel had a stubborn streak that ran deeper than common sense, and something in his gut told him that Josephine Fletcher was still alive somewhere in those mountains. The snow was still fresh enough that his horse struggled with every step. Samuel dismounted and led the animal, studying the landscape for any sign of disturbance, any indication that someone had passed this way before the storm. He found nothing the first day and made camp in a small cave as the sun set. The second day brought more of the same, endless white stretching in every direction, the cold seeping through his coat no matter how close he stayed to his small fire. On the third day, he found the scarf. It was caught on a low branch of a stunted pine, bright blue fabric standing out against the snow like a beacon. Samuel recognized it. He had seen Josephine wearing it in town. His heart began to pound as he studied the area more carefully. There, barely visible beneath a fresh dusting of snow, were the faint impressions of footprints leading away from the trail, heading deeper into the mountains toward an area Samuel knew was riddled with small canyons and caves. He followed the trail with renewed determination, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The prints were old, already half filled with new snow, but they gave him direction. Hours passed as he climbed higher, the air growing thinner, his lungs burning with effort. The horse balked at the steep terrain, and Samuel was forced to leave the animal tied in a sheltered spot with enough food and water for several days. He continued on foot, carrying only his most essential supplies. The sun was beginning to set when he saw the cave entrance, partially hidden by an overhang of rock and a curtain of icicles. He approached carefully, calling out so he would not startle anyone inside. "Hello, is anyone there? My name is Samuel Jennings. I am from El Paso. I am here to help." Silence greeted him, broken only by the whistle of wind through the rocks. Samuel felt his hope beginning to fade. Perhaps she had kept moving. Perhaps she was not here at all. But something made him push forward, ducking under the icicles and into the darkness of the cave. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust. When they did, he saw her. Josephine Fletcher was huddled against the back wall of the cave, wrapped in what looked like every piece of clothing she had been carrying. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue, but her eyes were open and aware. She stared at him as though he might be a hallucination. "Samuel Jennings." Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "Yes." He moved toward her quickly, already shrugging off his heavy coat. "I have been searching for you. Your father sent word. The whole town has been worried. I thought no one would come." Her words were slow, careful, as though speaking took great effort. "The snow kept falling. I tried to make it back to the trail, but I got turned around. I found this cave and decided to wait. I thought maybe when the snow melted." Samuel wrapped his coat around her shoulders and began assessing her condition. Her hands were like ice, but he could not see any signs of severe frostbite. She had been smart enough to keep moving her fingers and toes, smart enough to stay dry, smart enough to survive. "You did exactly right," he told her, pulling out his flint and steel to start a fire. There was wood stacked near the entrance, pieces she must have gathered before the worst of the storm hit. "You are alive, and that is what matters." He got the fire going and began heating water for tea. Josephine watched him work, her green eyes tracking his every movement. Samuel found himself acutely aware of her gaze, his hands suddenly clumsy as he fumbled with his supplies. "I remember you," she said after a while. "You helped Mr. Patterson repair his fence last summer. You would not take any payment." Samuel felt heat rise to his face that had nothing to do with the fire. He needed help. That seemed payment enough. "That is kind of you." She shifted slightly, pulling his coat tighter around herself. "I did not think anyone would risk the mountains to look for me. The storm was so bad. Your father was organizing search parties before the snow even stopped falling." Samuel handed her a tin cup of hot tea. "And I know these mountains. I have spent more time up here than in town some years." She took the cup with trembling hands, and Samuel had to help her hold it steady as she sipped. The simple touch sent something electric through him, a connection he had not expected. Josephine must have felt it too, because her eyes met his over the rim of the cup, and for a moment neither of them looked away. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming to find me, for not giving up. I would not have stopped searching until I found you." The words came out more intensely than he had intended, and Samuel cleared his throat, looking away. "That is, your father asked me to, and I gave my word." But even as he said it, he knew it was not entirely true. Something had driven him into these mountains beyond duty or a promise to Thomas Fletcher. Something had told him that Josephine Fletcher mattered, that she was worth risking his life for, even though they had barely exchanged a dozen words before this moment. They could not leave that night. The temperature had dropped too low, and Josephine was still too weak from her ordeal. Samuel made her as comfortable as possible, sharing his food supplies and building up the fire until the small cave felt almost warm. They talked as the hours passed, their voices low and intimate in the flickering firelight. Josephine told him about her life on the ranch, about growing up with 3 brothers who treated her like one of them, teaching her to ride and rope and shoot. She told him about her mother, who had died 2 years earlier, and how she had taken over running the household while her father and brothers worked the cattle. "Sometimes I feel like I am disappearing," she admitted, staring into the flames. Like the work and the responsibilities are swallowing me up until there is nothing left of who I am underneath. Does that make sense? Samuel nodded slowly. I think I understand. My father wanted me to take over his freight business in St. Louis. He had plans for me, a whole life mapped out. But I could not do it. I felt like I was suffocating in that city. So I came west 5 years ago, and I have been working as a ranch hand and occasional guide ever since. My father has not spoken to me since I left. You regret it? No. The answer came without hesitation. I would rather be poor and free than wealthy and trapped. Out here, I get to decide who I am. What I do matters because I choose it, not because someone expects it of me. Josephine smiled, and it transformed her face, chasing away the exhaustion and fear that had lined it. I think I would like that kind of freedom, to choose my own path. You can, Samuel said earnestly. You are stronger than you know. You survived a blizzard that would have killed most people. That takes courage, or stupidity. But she was still smiling. I should have turned back the moment I saw the clouds building. Maybe, but you are here now and you are safe. That is what matters. They fell silent, but it was a comfortable quiet, the kind that happens between people who have somehow skipped past the awkward early stages of acquaintance and landed somewhere deeper. Samuel found himself studying the curve of Josephine's face in the firelight, the way her hair had come loose from its pins to fall around her shoulders in waves. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a strength in the set of her jaw that drew him in more powerfully than mere physical attraction. You are staring, Josephine said softly, and Samuel realized she had caught him. I apologize. I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. You are not. She met his gaze directly. I am staring too. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Samuel wanted to close the distance between them, to pull her into his arms and kiss her until neither of them could breathe. But she had been through an ordeal, was still recovering, and he would not take advantage of her vulnerability. Instead, he added more wood to the fire and suggested they try to sleep. We have a long journey tomorrow. You need your rest. Josephine looked like she might argue, but then she nodded and settled back against the cave wall. Samuel gave her his bedroll and took the bare ground for himself, though he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, heard her voice, felt the ghost of her touch when their hands had met over the teacup. Morning came cold and clear. The storm finally passed. Samuel helped Josephine to her feet, watching carefully to make sure she was steady enough to travel. She was weak but determined, and together they made their way out of the cave and down the mountain toward where he had left his horse. The journey back was slow. Josephine tired easily, and Samuel called for frequent rests, using the stops as excuses to make sure she ate and drank water. They talked as they walked, sharing stories and dreams, learning each other in a way that felt both natural and profound. What do you want from life? Josephine asked during one rest stop. Beyond the freedom you already have, Samuel considered the question carefully. I suppose I want to matter. To build something that lasts. Maybe my own ranch someday, though I have been saving for years and still do not have enough for the land. And I want someone to share it with. A partner, not just a wife. Someone who understands that the West is hard but beautiful, and who is willing to work beside me to make something good. That sounds wonderful, Josephine said wistfully. My father keeps introducing me to ranchers and businessmen from town. Men who want a housekeeper and someone to bear their children, not a partner. They look at me like I am livestock they are considering purchasing. Anger flared hot in Samuel's chest. You deserve better than that. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, not what you can do for them. Maybe that person does not exist. He does. Samuel spoke with absolute certainty, and he would be lucky to have you." Josephine turned to look at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Samuel Jennings, are you trying to tell me something?" His heart hammered against his ribs. This was too fast, too soon. They had known each other for less than 2 days. But standing there in the snow-covered mountains with Josephine looking at him like he might hold all the answers to her questions, Samuel could not bring himself to lie or deflect. "I am trying to say that I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I walked into that cave," he admitted. "And probably for longer than that, if I am honest. I know we barely know each other. I know this is not the time or place. But when we get back to El Paso, I would like permission to call on you properly. To court you, if you would allow it." Josephine did not answer right away. She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough that he could count every freckle scattered across her nose. "I do not want to wait until we get back to El Paso," she said quietly. Then she reached up, pulled his face down to hers, and kissed him. The world seemed to stop. Samuel froze for half a heartbeat, his mind struggling to process that this was actually happening. Then he wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with everything he had been holding inside. She tasted like tea and smoke and something indefinably sweet. Her body fit against his perfectly, as though they had been made to stand exactly like this. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Josephine was smiling. "I have wanted to do that since yesterday," she confessed. "But you were being so proper and gentlemanly, I thought maybe I was imagining the way you looked at me." "You were not imagining anything." Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I have been fighting not to kiss you since the moment I saw you in that cave. Then do not fight any more." So he kissed her again, and again, until they were both giddy with it, laughing against each other's mouths like children who had discovered some wonderful secret. The cold and the snow and the difficult journey ahead all faded to nothing. There was only this, only them, only the perfect rightness of finding someone who made everything else make sense. They reached Samuel's horse by mid-afternoon. The animal was fine, having weathered the wait with typical stoic patience. Samuel helped Josephine into the saddle and then swung up behind her, keeping her tucked securely against his chest as they began the final leg of the journey back to El Paso. She dozed against him as they rode, exhausted from the walking and the emotion of the past few days. Samuel held her carefully, marveling at how natural it felt to have her in his arms, how right it seemed that she should be there. He had never believed in love at first sight, had always thought it was something made up for novels and romantic poetry. But what else could explain this feeling, this bone-deep certainty that Josephine Fletcher was meant to be his, and he was meant to be hers? The sun was setting when they finally rode into El Paso. News of their approach must have spread quickly, because it seemed like half the town came out to meet them. Thomas Fletcher reached them first, pulling Josephine down from the horse and into a crushing embrace, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank God," he kept saying, over and over. "Thank God you are safe." Josephine's brothers crowded around, all three of them talking at once, their relief palpable. Samuel hung back, giving the family their moment of reunion. But Josephine kept looking back at him over her father's shoulder, her eyes finding his in the crowd, reassuring him without words that this changed nothing between them. Eventually, Thomas Fletcher released his daughter and turned to Samuel. The older man's eyes were still wet as he gripped Samuel's hand in both of his own. "You brought her back. You did what everyone else said was impossible. How can I ever repay you?" "No payment necessary," Samuel said, uncomfortable with the gratitude and attention. "I am just glad I found her in time. Nevertheless, you saved my daughter's life. That debt cannot be dismissed so easily. Come to the ranch tomorrow. We will discuss compensation." Samuel wanted to argue, but Josephine shot him a look that clearly said to accept her father's invitation. So he nodded and watched as the Fletcher family headed toward the doctor's office to have Josephine checked over, even though she insisted she was fine. The next day, Samuel rode out to the Fletcher ranch with equal parts anticipation and nervousness churning in his stomach. He told himself he was only going because refusing would have been rude. But the truth was that he would have found any excuse to see Josephine again, to reassure himself that yesterday had been real and not some fever dream conjured by the cold and exhaustion. The Fletcher ranch was larger than Samuel had expected, a sprawling property with a well-maintained house and several outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the whole place had an air of prosperity and permanence that Samuel found both impressive and slightly intimidating. Thomas Fletcher met him at the door himself, ushering Samuel into a comfortable sitting room. Josephine was there, looking much recovered from her ordeal, her color back and her eyes bright. She smiled when she saw him, and Samuel felt his heart kick in his chest. "Mr. Jennings," Thomas began, settling into a chair and gesturing for Samuel to do the same. "I have been giving considerable thought to how best to thank you for bringing my daughter home safely. Money seems inadequate, though I am prepared to offer a substantial reward if you will accept it." "That is not necessary," Samuel started, but Thomas held up a hand. "Let me finish. I have another proposal that might interest you more. I am not getting any younger, and this ranch is more than I can manage with just my sons. I need someone with knowledge of the mountains, someone who knows tracking and survival, someone I can trust. I would like to offer you a position as ranch foreman, with a fair salary and a percentage of the profits. You would have your own cabin on the property and full authority over the ranch hands." Samuel stared at him, certain he had misheard. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I am not qualified for such a position. I have been a ranch hand, yes, but never a foreman." "You are qualified enough," Thomas said firmly. "Any man who can find one person lost in a blizzard in the mountains and bring her home alive has the skills and determination I need. What do you say?" Samuel looked at Josephine. She was watching him with barely contained hope, and suddenly he understood. This was not just about gratitude or need. This was Thomas Fletcher giving his blessing for Samuel to court his daughter, to be near her, to build something together. "I would be honored to accept," Samuel said slowly. "On one condition." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" "That you allow me to court your daughter properly, with the intent of marriage if she will have me." A slow smile spread across Thomas Fletcher's face. "Josephine informed me this morning that if I did not hire you, she was planning to run away to the mountains again just so you would have to come find her. So yes, you have my permission to court her, though I suspect the decision was made before I had any say in the matter." Josephine laughed, a bright, joyful sound that filled the room. "Father, you make me sound like a disobedient child. You are a grown woman who knows her own mind," Thomas corrected gently, "much like your mother was. If you have decided that Samuel Jennings is the man for you, then I trust your judgment. But," he turned back to Samuel, his expression growing serious, "if you hurt her, foreman or not, I will make you regret it." "I would never hurt her," Samuel said with absolute sincerity. "I would die first." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded, satisfied. "Good. Then we have an understanding. You can start as foreman next week. That should give you time to settle your affairs in town and move your things out here." The next few months passed in a blur of hard work and growing love. Samuel threw himself into his new role, earning the respect of the ranch hands through competence and fair treatment rather than demands for obedience. He proved himself time and again, solving problems, improving efficiency and increasing the ranch's productivity. But the work, satisfying as it was, paled in comparison to the hours he spent with Josephine. They rode out together across the ranch land, exploring the hills and valleys, talking about everything and nothing. Samuel learned that she was passionate about education, that she dreamed of opening a school in El Paso someday for children whose families could not afford to send them east. Josephine learned that Samuel wrote poetry in a leather journal he carried everywhere, though he was too embarrassed to share most of it with anyone. "Read me something," she demanded one evening as they sat together on the porch of his cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "It is not very good," Samuel warned, but he pulled out the journal anyway. He flipped through pages until he found what he was looking for, a piece he had written just last night. "She is the dawn breaking after endless night, the first warm breeze that promises spring will come. She is water in the desert, shelter in the storm. She is every good thing I never knew I was searching for until I found her wrapped in snow and shadow, waiting for me to bring her home." His voice trailed off, and he could not bring himself to look at Josephine, certain she would find it ridiculous. But then her hand touched his face, turning him toward her. "That is beautiful," she whispered. There were tears in her eyes. "That is about me." "Everything I write now is about you," Samuel admitted. "You are in every thought, every dream. I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Josephine kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Then it is a good thing you will never have to imagine it, because I am not going anywhere." They were married 6 months after Samuel found her in the mountains, in a ceremony that brought together half of El Paso and all of the surrounding ranchers. Josephine wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her, and carried wildflowers Samuel had picked from the mountain meadows himself. Samuel wore his best suit and could not stop smiling, even when his hands shook so badly that he nearly dropped the ring. Thomas Fletcher walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, but they were happy tears. He shook Samuel's hand before placing Josephine's hand in his, and the gesture felt like more than tradition. It felt like family, like belonging, like home. The wedding night was spent in the cabin that would now be their shared home. Samuel had spent weeks fixing it up, making improvements, adding touches he hoped Josephine would like. She walked through the space with wonder, touching everything, exclaiming over the new shelves he had built for her books, the rocking chair he had purchased from a carpenter in town, the beautiful quilt her mother had made that Thomas had given them as a wedding gift. "It is perfect," she said finally, turning to face him. "You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Samuel said, crossing the room to take her in his arms. "But I will spend every day of my life trying to be the man you deserve. You already are." She kissed him, and the kiss deepened, growing more passionate. They came together with a tenderness that gradually gave way to urgency, learning each other's bodies with the same care and attention they had given to learning each other's hearts. Afterward, lying tangled together in their bed, Josephine traced lazy patterns on Samuel's chest. "I have been thinking about something," she said quietly. "What is that?" "The school. I know we need to save money and it will take time, but I think I could start small. Maybe just a few children at first, teaching them in one of the unused outbuildings on the ranch. Father said he would help with supplies." Samuel pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I think that is a wonderful idea, and I want to help however I can. We could fix up the old barn, make it into a proper classroom. It would not take much. You would do that, even with everything else you have to manage. Josephine, your dreams are my dreams now. We are partners, remember. That means supporting each other, helping each other build the lives we want." She kissed him again, and he could feel her smiling against his lips. I love you, Samuel Jennings, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. I love you too. From the moment I saw you in that cave, I think. Or maybe even before that. They fell asleep wrapped around each other, the future stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. The next few years were not easy, but they were good. The ranch continued to prosper under Samuel's management, and Thomas Fletcher gradually handed over more responsibility, content to take a step back and let the younger generation take charge. Josephine's school grew from 3 students to over 20, and she proved to be a natural teacher, patient and creative and genuinely invested in each child's success. Samuel's relationship with his own father remained strained, despite several letters attempting reconciliation. But he found a father figure in Thomas, who treated him like the son he was by marriage and by choice. Josephine's brothers became his brothers, and together they built something stronger than just a business. They built a family. 2 years into their marriage, Josephine announced she was pregnant. Samuel felt equal parts elation and terror at the news. He had never been around babies much, had no idea how to be a father. But Josephine seemed confident enough for both of them, already planning and preparing with characteristic determination. Their first child, a boy they named Thomas after Josephine's father, was born on a cold November morning in 1883. Samuel held his son for the first time with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny red face in wonder. This was his child, his and Josephine's. A whole new person who would carry their legacy forward into the future. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, unable to look away. "He looks like you," Josephine said, exhausted but happy, watching them from the bed. "He looks like his mother," Samuel corrected. "Which means he is going to be beautiful and smart and stubborn as hell." Josephine laughed weakly. "Language, Samuel. You are a father now." Being a father, Samuel discovered, was harder than any work he had ever done on the ranch. It was sleepless nights and constant worry, trying to decipher cries that all sounded the same to his untrained ears. But it was also moments of pure magic, like the first time Thomas smiled up at him, or the way the baby would calm when Samuel sang the old songs his own mother had taught him. Josephine managed motherhood and teaching with the same grace she brought to everything else, though Samuel made sure she had help, hiring a woman from town to assist with both the baby and the school. They were partners in this too, taking turns with nighttime feedings, sharing the work and the joy equally. When Thomas was 18 months old, Josephine became pregnant again. This time it was a girl, whom they named Margaret after Josephine's mother. Samuel fell in love all over again with the tiny infant who had her mother's green eyes and auburn hair. 2 children felt like wealth beyond measure, more than he had ever dreamed of having. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Samuel's innovations and hard work paid off in increased profits, which he shared fairly with the hands who worked under him. He gained a reputation in the area as a fair but firm foreman, someone who expected excellence but rewarded it generously. Men wanted to work for him, and the Fletcher Ranch became known as one of the best operations in West Texas. Thomas Fletcher Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years after Samuel and Josephine married. It was a blow to the entire family, but especially to Josephine, who had been so close to her father. Samuel held her through her grief, gave her space to mourn, and made sure she knew she did not have to be strong all the time. "He was proud of you," Samuel told her one evening as they sat together in the gathering darkness. "He told me so many times. He said watching you build your school and raise your children while helping run the ranch made him realize that he had raised someone stronger and more capable than he ever could have imagined." Josephine cried against his shoulder, but they were not entirely sad tears. "I miss him so much." But I am grateful too. Grateful he got to meet his grandchildren, grateful he saw me happy, grateful he brought you into our lives. He gave me everything, Samuel agreed. A home, a purpose. I will never stop being thankful for that. In his will, Thomas Fletcher left the ranch equally to his 4 children, but with the stipulation that Samuel continue as foreman for as long as he wished. It was an arrangement that worked well. Josephine's brothers had their own lives and families, and they were content to let Samuel manage the day-to-day operations while they focused on their portions of the inheritance. By the time Samuel turned 30, he and Josephine had 4 children, Thomas, Margaret, and then twin boys named David and Samuel Jr. The cabin had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and Josephine's school had become an established institution in El Paso, with a permanent building in town and 3 other teachers working under her direction. Life was full and busy and sometimes overwhelming, but Samuel would not have changed any of it. Every morning, he woke up next to the woman who had somehow become even more beautiful to him with each passing year. Every evening, he came home to children who ran to greet him with shouts of joy. Every day, he did work that mattered, that made a difference. You remember the cave? Josephine asked him one night after they had finally gotten all 4 children to sleep. They were sitting on their porch, watching the stars come out, enjoying a rare moment of peace and quiet. Every detail, Samuel said. I remember thinking I had found the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even half frozen and terrified. I remember wanting to protect you from everything. You did protect me. You saved my life. And you saved mine, Samuel countered. I was just drifting before I met you, working but not building, living but not really alive. You gave me purpose, direction. You gave me everything. Josephine leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side the way she always had. The snow hid me from the world that day. But it brought me to you. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if you had not come looking, if I had waited too long, or if you had given up. I would never have given up, Samuel said firmly. I told you that first night I would have searched until I found you. Even if I had not known you, even if your father had not asked, something in me would have known I needed to find you. Fate, Josephine said softly. My mother used to say that some people are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way. I think she was right. Samuel pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Then I am grateful to fate or God or whatever force brought that blizzard and then brought me to you. Because you are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Jennings. You and our children and this life we have built together. I love you, she said, the words as true and powerful as the first time she had spoken them. I love you too. Forever. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, the night air cool and sweet with the scent of sage and dust. Inside, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch sprawled out in all directions, land they had worked and improved and made their own. The mountains rose in the distance, still snow-capped even in summer, silent guardians holding the memory of where their story had begun. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Josephine's love only deepened. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, difficult seasons and personal losses. They celebrated their children's achievements and comforted them through failures. They grew older together, their hair gaining threads of silver, their faces marking the passage of time. Thomas became a lawyer, studying back east before returning to El Paso to open his own practice. Margaret married a teacher and opened a second school in a neighboring town, carrying on her mother's legacy. The twins took over running the ranch, working together with an efficiency that made Samuel proud. On their 20th anniversary, Samuel took Josephine back up into the mountains. It was summer this time, the trails clear and easy, wildflowers blooming in the meadows. They found the cave where he had discovered her all those years ago, and they stood together at the entrance, looking out at the view. "I was so scared," Josephine said, her hand in his. "Not just of dying, but of disappearing without anyone knowing. Of not mattering." "You matter," Samuel told her, pulling her close. "You matter more than you will ever know. You changed my life. You changed this whole town with your school. You raised 4 incredible children who will go on to change more lives in turn. How could you ever think you did not matter?" "I know that now," she said, smiling up at him, "because you spent 20 years showing me. Every single day you have made me feel valued and seen and loved." "That is quite a gift, Samuel Jennings." "It is easy to give when you mean it," Samuel replied. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I got you something for our anniversary." Josephine unwrapped it carefully, her eyes widening when she saw the leather-bound book inside. She opened it and began to read, then looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You copied all your poems," she said wonderingly. "All the ones you wrote about me." "About us," Samuel corrected. "Our story. I wanted you to have them all in one place, so you would always know how you made me feel, how you still make me feel." Josephine kissed him there in the mouth of the cave where their story had begun, and the kiss held 20 years of love and partnership, of shared dreams and mutual respect, of passion that had never faded despite the years and the challenges. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips, "for searching for me, for finding me, for never giving up, not on that day and not on any day since." "Thank you for being worth finding," Samuel replied, "and for saying yes when I asked to court you, and for building this life with me. I would search through 1,000 blizzards if it meant finding you at the end." They stayed in the mountains through the afternoon, talking and laughing and remembering. They made love under the open sky with the kind of familiarity and joy that only comes from 2 decades of partnership. Then they rode back to the ranch together, side by side, the way they always had been and always would be. As they grew older, Samuel and Josephine became pillars of the El Paso community. Her school expanded again, and Samuel established a fund to help families who could not afford the small tuition, ensuring that every child who wanted an education could get one. They sponsored scholarships for promising students to attend university back east. They helped young families get started with loans and advice, and sometimes just a listening ear. Their children gave them grandchildren, 11 in total, who filled their later years with joy and chaos. Samuel taught them to ride and track and survive in the wilderness. Josephine taught them to read and think and question. Together, they passed on the values they had lived by: kindness, hard work, partnership, love. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted 3 days. Children and grandchildren filled every available space, their laughter echoing off the hills. Samuel stood on the porch with Josephine in his arms, watching the organized chaos, and felt a profound sense of contentment. "We did well," Josephine said, reading his mind the way she so often did. "We did very well," Samuel agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "You have any regrets?" Samuel thought about the question seriously. He thought about the life he might have had if he had stayed in St. Louis, taken over his father's business. He thought about the years of reconciliation with his father that had come too late, his father passing away before they could truly mend their relationship. He thought about the struggles and setbacks, the times when money was tight and the future uncertain. "No," he said finally. "Not a single one. Every choice I made, every step I took led me to you. How could I regret any of that?" Josephine smiled and stood on her toes to kiss him, not caring that their children and grandchildren could see that she was 60 years old and supposedly too dignified for such displays. I love you, Samuel Jennings, today and always. I love you too, Josephine Jennings, from the first moment I saw you in that cave until my last breath. The celebration continued around them, but for a moment it was just the two of them, standing together the way they had stood together for 40 years. Partners, lovers, friends, everything that mattered. Samuel lived to be 72, passing away peacefully in his sleep with Josephine beside him. His last words to her, whispered in the darkness of their bedroom, were a promise. I will find you again. In whatever comes next, I will search until I find you. Josephine held his hand as he slipped away, her tears falling silently. But mixed with the grief was gratitude for the life they had shared, for the love that had sustained them through everything. She had been found once in the snow and cold by a man who refused to give up. She had been found and cherished and loved beyond measure for 51 years of marriage. She lived another 8 years after Samuel's death, surrounded by children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She continued teaching until the very end, her mind sharp and her passion for education never dimming. She spoke of Samuel often, keeping his memory alive with stories of his kindness, his courage, his unwavering love. When Josephine passed away at the age of 80, the whole town mourned. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched through her teaching and her generosity. They buried her next to Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains where their story had begun. The gravestone bore both their names and a simple inscription chosen by their children. The snow hid her from the world. He searched until he found her. Together, they built a love that lasted forever. The ranch continued through generations of their descendants, and Josephine's school became one of the finest educational institutions in West Texas. Their story became local legend, told and retold, embellished with each telling but always true in its essence. A tale of determination and fate, of a search through impossible conditions that led to a love that changed 2 lives and countless others. On winter days when snow fell on El Paso, rare as it was, people would look up at the mountains and remember. They would tell their children about the blizzard of 1881, about the young woman who survived against all odds, about the cowboy who refused to give up until he found her. They would tell them about the love that grew from that desperate search, about the family and legacy that followed. And in quiet moments, when the wind whistled through the mountain passes and snow drifted against the rocks, some said you could still feel their presence there. 2 souls who had found each other against impossible odds, who had built something beautiful and lasting, who had loved with everything they had, until death parted them, and then beyond. Their story became a promise to everyone who heard it. That love was worth searching for, that the right person was worth any struggle to find, that 2 people who truly belonged together would find their way to each other no matter what obstacles stood between them. The snow might hide you from the world, but if your heart was calling to the right person, they would search until they found you. They would bring you home. They would love you forever, and that, in the end, was all that really mattered. Not wealth or status or easy lives, but finding that one person who made everything else make sense. Finding them and choosing them, and building a life together that honored the miracle of that finding. Samuel and Josephine's descendants carried that lesson forward, generation after generation. They married for love, worked as partners, built lives of meaning and purpose. They looked to the mountains and remembered where they came from, the story that had started their family, the love that had made everything possible. The ranch still stood over a century later, though it had changed hands and purposes many times. But the hill where Samuel and Josephine were buried remained untouched, a small cemetery surrounded by a white fence, carefully maintained by whoever currently owned the land. Visitors still came sometimes, drawn by the story, wanting to pay their respects to a love that had become legend. And on those rare winter days when snow fell on El Paso, when the mountains turned white and the world seemed to hold its breath, people would pause in their busy lives. They would remember that once, long ago, a young woman had been lost in a blizzard. They would remember that a cowboy had searched through impossible conditions until he found her. They would remember that from that desperate search had grown a love story for the ages. The snow had hidden her from the world, but Samuel had searched until he found her. And in finding her, he had found himself, his purpose, his home. Together, they had created something that lasted far beyond their own lives, a legacy of love and partnership that inspired everyone who heard their story. That was the true miracle. Not just that he had found her, though that was remarkable enough, but that having found her, he had cherished her every day for the rest of their lives. That she had loved him with equal devotion and passion. That they had built not just a family, but a model of what marriage could be when two people truly committed to each other. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death. But it also continued in the lives they had touched, the children they had raised, the community they had served, the love they had demonstrated. It continued in every couple who heard their tale and vowed to love each other with the same devotion. It continued in every person who refused to give up searching for what mattered most. The snow hid her from the world. A cowboy searched until he found her. And from that finding came a love that would never truly die, that would live on in memory and story, and the hearts of everyone who believed that some things were worth searching for, no matter how long it took or how difficult the journey. That was Samuel and Josephine's gift to the world, proof that true love existed, that it was worth fighting for, that two people who belonged together would find their way to each other if they just refused to give up. It was a gift that kept giving generation after generation, inspiring new love stories, new searches, new findings. And somewhere, perhaps, Samuel and Josephine watched it all together as they had always been. The search was over. They had found each other. Nothing else mattered but that. Nothing else ever would.